The world of the UFC is as thrilling as it is unpredictable. Over the years, we've seen fighters rise to the highest points in their life and others to their lowest. In this video, we will dive into the stories of fighters who've been banned from the UFC for life, exploring the reasons behind their bans and their paths post-UFC. Let's begin, shall we? Number 1, Paul Daley. Paul Daley is one of the top welterweights who actually became well-known while fighting for Strikeforce and Bellator. He got banned for life for the unfortunate incident he caused at UFC 113 in Montreal in 2010 against Josh Koscheck. Daley was coming off 2 back-to-back KO finishes, and many people saw him as the future welterweight world champion. The hype behind this bout was massive, mainly because there was a big rivalry and a lot of back-and-forth trash talk between these two. During their fight, Daley lost his temper in the first round when Koscheck motioned to be hit with an illegal knee to the groin.
Here's Koscheck at the end of the fight, and look at Dan Mergliota.
Koscheck was then given time to recover. The fight would later continue, and Koscheck would then go on to dominate the match from the top position, utilizing high-level wrestling, while Daley was clearly looking desperate and frustrated at the bottom. At the end of the last round, Daley went up to Koscheck, but instead of shaking his hand, he unexpectedly hit him with a punch. The referee, Dan Mergliota, promptly intervened and held Daley against the fence to prevent any further harm. After the incident, UFC President Dana White commented on Paul Daley's unsportsmanlike conduct.
In sports, and this is probably one of the most lenient organizations, and we're all human, we all make mistakes, things happen.
I don't care if Daley fights in every show all over the world and becomes the best, and everybody thinks he is the pound-for-pound best in the world, White fumed afterward. He will never fight in the UFC again. Strikeforce and Bama. In 2015, he signed with Bellator MMA and became one of their most popular fighters. Despite his success and marketability as a fighter, he was never allowed to return to the UFC. Number 2, Rousimar Palhares. Rousimar Palhares is undoubtedly among the best grapplers in MMA history. However, despite his success in the MMA world, he has a reputation for being very unsportsmanlike. Considering his misconduct inside the cage, this is not a big surprise, which left him banned from the UFC for life. The Brazilian was a master in using his incredible athleticism and BJJ skills to take his opponents down and submit them without much resistance. However, for whatever reason, he tended to hold on to submission long after the opponent tapped out, and in some cases, even after the referee stepped in and told him to stop. His first significant infraction came in 2010 at UFC 111 when he caught Tomasz Drawl into a knee bar, which is, by the way, one of the most dangerous submissions because it can easily result in fractures and torn ligaments.
Oh man, that's like 5 solid seconds. I mean, it was a little slowed down at the end.
Despite Drawl urgently tapping and screaming in pain, Palhares refused to let go of the knee bar until the referee physically forcefully separated his hand from Drawl's leg. Palhares received considerable backlash from the media and fans after the fight, along with a 90-day suspension for not letting go of the submission after the initial stoppage.
Yeah, he tore his knee. He did not let go when he tapped either.
After receiving public backlash and serving a lengthy suspension, one would expect Palhares to have learned from his mistakes. However, in 2013, at UFC Fight Night 29, he repeated the same mistake 2 years later against Mike Pierce. During the fight, the Brazilian managed to catch Pierce in a heel hook submission 30 seconds into the fight. But again, Palhares would not release the submission hold even after Pierce urgently tapped 8 times while screaming in pain. This led the referee to forcefully stop the fight immediately. The next day, the UFC president announced Palhares had been removed from their roster for repeated unsportsmanlike conduct and implied he would never fight in the UFC again. Number 3, Jason High. Jason High first fought under the UFC banner in 2010 when he lost to Charlie Brenneman and was immediately released from the company shortly after. He bounced back by scoring 7 straight wins across different promotions, such as Strikeforce, to convince the UFC matchmakers to give him another chance. After going 2-1 in his second stint with the UFC, he faced the former champion Rafael dos Anjos, where he made a mistake that cost him a UFC career. It all happened in the second round when Dos Anjos managed to connect with a big right hand. Jason crumbled down to the canvas, clearly rocked, and then the referee stopped the match with around 90 seconds left on the clock. Jason quickly stood up to dispute the stoppage, showing his displeasure towards the referee, Kevin Mulhall. However, he went a step too far by shoving the referee, which was very unprofessional. After publicly apologizing for his misconduct on social media, Jason High's apology was deemed insufficient and too late. Consequently, Dana White decided to permanently remove him from the roster. That Jason High kid got up and pushed a referee, he's cut, White said. I'm gonna cut him. I look at that the way Paul Daley put his hands on his opponent after a fight was over. You don't ever touch a referee, ever. You're done here. He's been apologizing on Twitter, but he's done. UFC aimed to send a clear message to all fighters. Respecting the referee is crucial, even if they disagree with them, and there will be grave consequences if a fighter physically assaults a referee. Number 4, Matt Riddle. Although he is a famous WWE wrestler, Matt Riddle was once a promising UFC prospect. He got into the UFC through the Ultimate Fighter show back in 2008, and in the next 5 years, he would compete 13 times inside the octagon. Between 2012 and 2013, he went on to win 4 fights in a row, but his rise would come to a screeching stop when the UFC decided to ban him for life. Technically, Riddle has not been officially banned for life, but UFC boss Dana White stated he would never be back. The reason was the fact that Riddle tested positive for cannabis in 2 out of his last 4 fights against Chris Clements and Che Mills. Although the USADA and athletic commissions later changed their stance on cannabis, testing positive for cannabis back then was a serious violation, especially if an athlete failed 2 tests in the same year. Riddle was banned from the UFC after making provocative claims about why he smokes cannabis regularly, which enraged Dana White. Everybody's going to have an excuse of why they were cut. Matt Riddle did an interview before that fight where he said, "I smoke weed so that I don't beat my children," then he tests positive for it. He's a king moron, White said following the UFC 158 pre-fight press conference. That's why he's not here. He's cut because he's a moron. Overall, Riddle was a promising prospect in the welterweight division and a highly talented wrestler, so it's a shame that he wasn't able to showcase his full potential. After being fired from the UFC, Matt Riddle turned to professional wrestling, where he later signed with the premier promotion, WWE. Number 5, Ruslan Magomedov. Ruslan Magomedov's UFC career was ended by issues related to doping violations. His repeated failures in drug tests under the United States anti-doping agency, USADA, led to severe consequences. In the fall of 2018, Magomedov encountered his 3rd failed doping test as a result of taking anabolic steroids and PEDs, which was a critical blow to his standing in the UFC. The situation escalated further when, in February 2019, he refused to take another required test. This refusal ultimately resulted in a lifetime ban from the UFC. Following his release from the UFC, Magomedov continued his professional fighting career by signing with the Russian Absolute Championship Akhmat ACA promotion. Number 6, Jonathan Koppenhaver, aka War Machine. Koppenhaver earned his UFC contract through Ultimate Fighter Season 6, where he was a member of Team Sarah. He would score an impressive KO win in his debut before dropping a decision to Yoshiyuki Yoshida at UFC 84, and this was the last UFC fans saw of him because he got released shortly after. Joe Silva, the UFC matchmaker at the time, offered Koppenhaver a fight against Brandon Wolf, but he refused and engaged in a major feud with Silva. Despite being given an ultimatum to either accept the fight offer or not fight at all, Koppenhaver played hardball by refusing to fight and requesting a different opponent. Around the same time, Koppenhaver would also make very controversial comments related to the death of the former UFC fighter, Evan Tanner, who tragically passed away. Koppenhaver later retracted his comments, though. Amid controversy, Koppenhaver was released from the UFC contract. Koppenhaver has competed in Bellator MMA after getting cut from the UFC. Koppenhaver later made another headline outside the MMA when he was given a life sentence in prison for brutally assaulting his ex-girlfriend. And that's it for this video. Please click the like and subscribe buttons down below if you found it useful. To make sure you don't miss any uploads, tap the bell icon. Share the video and comment down your thoughts. See you in the next one.